Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain and welcome back. Now, today I wanted to talk about something that's come up to me from two or three people, which is, they always come back to me and they say, oh, you talk about asking questions, finding proof, getting all the information that you need, but sometimes asking questions is just so hard. People aren't willing to answer questions. People aren't willing to engage in conversation. People aren't willing to talk about stuff. And to that, I say, well, yeah, sometimes you'll get someone that just doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to address it, will just stonewall. But in a lot of other instances, there are ways to enable those conversations, and they're small. They're in the moment kind of things, and how to then make the best of the time that you're spending asking those questions as well. And this is something that I've kind of touched on in places in the past in other videos. It's something that I end up talking to people an awful lot about, considering that a lot of the kind of worries and concerns that people come to me with as a coach are focused around the way they feel, or a roadblock that they've run into that they're not having a great time with, and they want to get past it. And a lot of the things that are holding them back or keeping them away from that obstacle are feelings, thoughts, doubts, things like that are attached to them, and just kind of weigh them down, so that climbing over a wall isn't going to be a thing that they can do. And as a result, though, it's asking these questions. It's asking questions of everybody around you as much as it is asking questions of yourself. And so you can kind of roll this round to kind of use it against yourself quite happily. But we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, because ultimately we've got four things here that enable better asking of questions and enable you to make better use of the answers that you get. So the first thing, and this is something that usually just locks people down, and that is when it comes to asking a question, you don't know when it's the right time, you don't know what you're doing, you've just got this question burning around inside you and you don't know how to kind of just throw it out there for whoever it is to address. And so one of the things that I do, and I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that I do as a coach, because obviously I'm having to poke and prod and potentially delve quite deeply with a client or with someone that I'm coaching into their more private and locked away areas of their life. And so as a result, one of the things that I tend to go back to is ask if you can ask. Can I ask you a question? That gives them the chance to say no. And if they don't say no, many people won't say no, then they're probably going to have a reason for saying no. And if they do, then you can ask them why not. If you're at work and you go to your boss and you go, boss, can I ask you a question? And they go, not right now, I'm just doing something. Okay, then when can I ask you? It allows you then to schedule it. It allows you then to have a time ready for when your question is going to be answered. Otherwise, if they say yes, then they've given you, they've agreed with you that they're going to give you an answer, or that at the very least that you can ask them the question. Which means that then, if it's not a particularly positive question, or it might have a slew of fairly negative answers to it, it's going to be something that they've already kind of signed on for in a way. Obviously, one of the best examples of this is in all TV everywhere. When you've got a character that turns around to someone and goes, can I ask you a personal question? The other character always says yes. Why? Because otherwise there would be no gap there for narrative exposition and kind of throwing plot out there without action. You take that into the real world, though, and you go, okay, well, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a personal question? People are firstly more likely to agree anyway, but also in actually agreeing, they know what they're getting into. Everyone's got a similar expectation, i.e. a question is going to be asked and an answer is going to be expected. And it's all fairly straightforward. It's something that people can agree to. Now, you'd obviously, after every single question, you're not going to want to ask, can I ask you a question? you ask the question after they've said yes, and then you've got a follow-up question. You go, can I ask you another question? You might do that a couple of times throughout an entire conversation, maybe, as you're moving between topics. But if you've got a follow-up, then address the follow-up. You don't have to ask again and again and again if you can ask them questions, because once they've engaged with you, one would hope that it's going to become a conversation, unless it's purely a yes or no kind of answer, like yes or no question, and so you're just going to be able to walk away with the result that you get. For instance, going, can I ask you a question, boss? No, not right now. I'll talk to you about it later. Okay, well, fair enough. So if I come back in half an hour, can I just ask you? Yeah, that's fine. You come back in half an hour and your question is, that holiday that I requested, I need to know if I'm getting it or not. Am I getting it or not? In which case they can go yes or no, and then you can go, okay, fair enough, and you can move off and do whatever it is that you need to do with that information. If, however, it's a more broad question, what is it that we've got to do for X, Y, and Z for the next quarter, then that's going to potentially turn into a larger conversation where they're informing you of things, where you have other questions, where there are other things that you might want to contribute, or where they would seek your opinion as well. And so as a result, it's going to cascade into more of a conversation. That's more of a work-based kind of situation there, but it's one that can be applied to anything. The next thing, so after you've asked, the next thing is, don't overload people with questions. A lot of people, I'll do this when I'm not paying much attention to what's going on, or if I'm kind of rolling with stuff, like a conversation with family, friends, whatever, then I might throw out one question, then another, and it usually goes in packs of like two or three, where you go, oh, well, if that's the case, then what about this? And then also, but how do you feel about that? Don't do that. To get the most quality out of the interaction that you're having around asking questions, ask one question at a time, because otherwise people get overloaded. They get mixed up. They confuse elements of the different questions and try and come up with one big composite answer. So if you want the best quality answer, obviously there are times when asking a slew of questions in one go, especially in writing where it's something that they can refer back to and answer each question individually, then that's fine. But person-to-person interaction, over the phone, stuff like that, ask the question, because otherwise having that confused mix of various bits and pieces in your answer from potentially 3 or so different questions, it might mean that then you have to waste time sieving through everything. And it also might mean that one of those questions that you've asked that is now causing confusion, that is now causing this backlog, is invalidated by one of the earlier questions you asked or one of the later questions you asked, in which case, unless you've got someone that's listening, that's paying you attention, and that's actually gone, okay, well, you've asked these 3 questions, I feel like question 3 is going to answer all of them, so let me address that one, and then organize their response in such a way. A lot of people won't do that in their just day-to-day lives. They don't think that formally, and they don't necessarily listen and pay attention with that level of detail. So asking one question at a time is going to allow you so much more in the way of useful and helpful information, rather than just throwing out questions and hoping for like solid answers back. Now, this can take practice. All of these things can take practice. The asking before you ask a sensitive question. Obviously, some questions are more sensitive than others, some are more personal than others, and so you've got those limits to try and find. But when it comes to asking individual questions, it's more about restraint. That's something that you can practice quite actively, because it's literally just a case of, I am asking one question. That question has now had the question mark hit the end of it, and now I no longer have anything to say until I have received a response. It's being a little bit stricter with yourself to allow you to get as much out of it as possible. There has to be the to and fro, and overloading someone with questions to begin with can kind of bog things down. And this is something that we've seen in some of the other stuff that I'm covering this week. in these videos, stuff like the Jordan Peterson interview, where questioning and the way that Kathy Newman, the interviewer, kind of addressed the way that she was questioning was not done in this manner. It wasn't one specific question first to allow for an answer to then do whatever else. And in fact, there were an awful lot of statements in there. But anyway, I covered that in a different video. So the next thing, the third thing though, and I've talked about this before, and that's the power of silence. That's the power of leaving emptiness there to be filled. Because once you've asked a question, don't worry about the silence. Obviously, if it goes on for like 3, 4, 5 minutes, then that might be a case to kind of prompt for something else, or ask the question again, or ask a different question. Look for some kind of response. But for the most part, silence is just an amazing tool. And especially in regards to this, because if you are there and you ask one question and therefore you are sat in silence, there are a couple of things that come across. Firstly, you're waiting for that one specific answer. You will be content with that one question being answered because that is the only thing that you are doing. That is the only thing that you are there currently acting upon. In which case, sometimes when you just sit there in silence and wait for the answer, someone, even if they don't want to give you the answer, even if it's something that's more uncomfortable for them, even if it's something that's more worrisome for them, even if it's something that they're not 100% sure on, they will try and give you an answer because that seems to be your sole purpose for being there. And we don't like being indebted to people. We don't like being at a deficit in one way or another. So if you're there, you've asked them, they've agreed and to responding to you, and then you have only asked that one question and then sat there waiting attentively for the response, then they are going to want to, on some deep level, deal with you. You know, they're going to want to do so in such a way that you aren't a problem for them anymore. You aren't something that's right there and apparent to them as an obstacle to the rest of their day, or something else that they've got to deal with, or whatever else. The other thing is, people are, for the most part, don't like silence. Like I'm someone that, for the most part, after one point, realised that silence is only awkward or worrisome or anything like that if I let myself feel like it is. So I'm quite happy sitting in silence personally. And as a result, though, I'm not under pressure to fill silence, especially when I'm asking questions of clients and things. You know, they're specifically paying me to sit there and be silent when I'm asking questions. You know, I ask the question, I might kind of ask the question, then when they and because they're not completely clear on it, I might rephrase the question just to try and open it up in a different way to them. But otherwise, I'm not going to just solely start filling space. I'm going to give them the time and the empty air for them to fill it with whatever response they want to give. And so when you've got that kind of empty space, people are either going to feel under pressure because it's uncomfortable for them, or they're going to feel like they've got the time to answer. It's going to be one or the other, and it's going to allow them to put information out there in front of you. In which case, you know, I've done video on the power of silence before, as far as I remember, and so as a result, you know, this that kind of plays into that, and the silence aspect obviously has to have a limit too, but that limit for some people can be huge. I've, at one point when I was doing some of my training for getting my qualifications in coaching, and some of the other mentoring stuff that I've done, there were times when I would sit there in silence with someone who was trying to work on something, and they had a question that I had posed them, and as a result of working through it in their head, working through some of the stuff that they were doing, and kind of being attentive to their situation as a whole, not just dealing with me individually, but also dealing with what was in front of them, it gave them time to think, to process, and then 10 minutes later they'd come out and give me the answer, just because I had sat there waiting for them. I'd given them the time, the space, and allowed them the distraction if they needed it, you know, in certain instances, or if they had that as another concern, you know. And so it all kind of cascaded into a quality answer that then allowed for a growth into a quality conversation. Now, the last thing, and this is going to be the hardest thing. This is number 4, and it's the hardest damn thing about all of this. When you are asking questions, you are going to want to judge as the words come out of people's mouths. Don't. If you judge, then you aren't listening. You're judging. You're paying too much attention to your own thoughts and not enough attention to the thoughts that are being presented to you. The correct manner would be to listen in as non-judgmental way as possible, and then once they have finished, then either ask more questions or address the things that you can judge after that. Because obviously, you cut someone off halfway through a thought, then there's a good chance that you've firstly not got all the information, but secondly, the kind of next couple of things that they could have said may have then validated their view or given you more information to actually see where they were coming from. You know, someone turning around and saying something that could be absolutely horrific. You know, someone starting off a sentence with "Hitler was a great man," for instance. If you cut them off right there because you're going, "Oh, whoa, 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 no, that's how could you possibly say that?" That's that, you know, they could then have easily, if you hadn't cut them off, then they could have followed that up with, "He was incredibly evil, but he did bring the world to a place that it had never been before. In terms of his deeds, they were substantial. In terms of what he actually did, he was Satan in personified." That then allows you more information to then judge what they're saying. Yeah, no one would. No, I don't think anyone would. Well, no, there are people that would argue against this because they're called Holocaust deniers. But there aren't many people that in that particular exaggerated situation would really argue with the impact that one man had over most of, if not the entire world. And so as a result, that the impact being the measure of greatness being used for the situation that's being discussed, you know, that then doesn't invalidate the fact that he was an evil individual. You know, but if you cut someone off halfway through what they're saying, instead of allowing them to finish their thought, give you all of the information, purely based on your judgments, firstly, you're not giving them the silence to finish, you know, power of silence and all that, but also you've been listening too much to your own internal swayings one way or the other, rather than letting them finish and engaging with them on the entire encapsulated idea that they've presented to you, rather than the bits of information that you've picked out. In which case, listen first, hear what they're saying, listen to it, take in the details, and then judge it, and then respond. Yeah, it's a simple process, and you can easily then repeat with kind of the asking a single question, waiting for another response, and then coming back and doing the same thing all over again. It's very much a rinse and repeat after you've started the conversation by asking if you can ask a question. You know, and it's a cascade, because obviously then the more information you get, the better the quality of the conversation, even if it turns into an argument, even if it turns into a debate, even if it turns into something that is maybe more negative. As I've said before, when people are espousing negative ideas, the thing to do is to not lambast them halfway through the discussion, but to ask more questions, open things up more, because then they're going to hang themselves, they're going to build their own gallows, slip their head through their own noose, and kick the stool away, allowing the entire audience, whoever that audience may be, to see how their own ideas have hung them, how they've hung themselves with their own ideas, and how they've got no kind of backwards motion or other recourse in terms of kind of cutting themselves down now. You know, they're stuck because that's everything that they've thrown out there, and you've just been able to get them to do all the hard work for you. They've beaten themselves on your behalf. And that's purely, though, if you were talking about this in a conflicting way. Because obviously thinking about it in regards to, say, a conversation with a spouse, with a partner. You know, you've asked if you can ask the question, you've asked a single question, you've given them time to reply, and then after you've given them the time to reply, if you don't judge as you're listening, they will tell you so much. This is someone that wants to confide in you. This is someone that feels closer to you than very possibly anybody else. And so asking that question and not judging, not jumping in halfway through, not cutting them off, letting them finish, and then addressing it. They're going to tell you how they're feeling. They're going to tell you what their worries are, what their values and beliefs are, whether or not their values and beliefs are even right, whether they have any evidence for what they're saying, whether they have a solution for it, whether they don't have a solution for it but would like a solution, whether it's something you can even help with. You know, there's so much information that they will just dump on you that then you can, if you've just been listening, if you've just been taking it in, paying attention to the details, and then you can judge it based on priority to you, based on priority of importance, based on what has evidence, what doesn't, whether or not something needs clarifying, and then you can follow up with more questions. Those great things that help us understand everything. You know, you can cascade and roll forward with kind of doing this just by taking a little bit more time and being a little stricter with yourself. You know, being non-judgmental can be incredibly hard. It can be incredibly taxing. It can potentially take you into a very kind of misanthropic, kind of nihilistic place at times, because you'll remove yourself from judging, and then as soon as you are called on to make a judgment, to decide something, to take a look at some evidence and kind of work things out, it can lead you to a place that's not particularly positive all the time. You know, you can be sat there going, oh, well, I wasn't judging, live and let live, everything's fine, I'm not going to be making suggestions, I'm just going to be asking questions, I'm just going to be finding out the information, seeing what's real, what's not, and just dealing with it that way. And then you're actually called to make a decision based on some of that information, and you have to judge it, you have to analyse it in that way, and then you can dig yourself a really deep pit of going, well, yeah, I've said live and let live, but this person's an arsehole. So if anyone needs to go down, it's probably that guy. You know, it can then make you incredibly demoralised, incredibly upset with yourself over all of the decisions you've had to make. It can bring on things like guilt and shame and upset, which can be hard to tackle unless those kind of mindsets where, you know, I tend to be more focused on big picture, cosmic kind of nihilism, to one degree or another anyway, so it makes very little impact on me personally based on where my head is at. But someone that's much more optimistic or much more positive, they very well may find themselves being very non-judgmental until such time as they are called on to be very judgmental, and then they feel bad about it because they've just had to shit all over someone, you know, and it becomes a much more negative experience. But anyway, as I said at the beginning, we can turn this round to address questions to ourselves as well. So we can, in terms of asking ourselves, when we can ask ourselves a question, don't necessarily go, look in a mirror and go, Seb, can I ask you a question? Because you're not going to reply to yourself like that. But what you can do is go, well, I have a question that I need to sit down, I need to work out. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and at 2 o'clock this afternoon, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to go through it. I'm going to sit down and just set myself this question, and by the end of half an hour I need to have an answer. There we go. Sure. In which case you've not necessarily asked yourself, but you've given yourself permission for a time slot to address it. Next thing, one question. Obviously, it's easy to set yourself the one question, and then you can cascade it into other questions if you need to. Depends on the question, obviously. Then, in regards to giving yourself the time to answer, you know, as said, you need to have a limit. In my example a second ago, I said half an hour to muddle through something in my head or write it down or whatever. You know, that's a thing that can happen. And then, in regards to being non-judgmental, just be honest with yourself. Write down everything that's in your head. Talk out everything that's in your head. Don't be worried about what's good, what's bad, what's different. Just say it all. and then you can go through it afterwards. You know, there are things that we hide from everybody, and there are things that we lie about to everybody, including ourselves, and that always causes more obstacles. That always locks things away from anyone else interacting with, but also from ourselves, because we can't deal with them when they're locked away. And so, as a result, being honest, not judging yourself too harshly until you've actually finished answering, so that then you can judge yourself more harshly to get to the bottom of something, that's going to be far, far more important than kind of just sitting to one side and going, no, that's a thing that I can't touch. I can't write that down. The fact that I like to be doing, I don't know, X, Y, and Z. The fact that I like to go mud wrestling at the weekend, you know, that's a thing that I just couldn't write down. That's a guilty pleasure. It's a thing that I can't address as part of this other whole of other things that I'm dealing with. Even though it's something that's in my mind that's attached to this issue, I can't write that down. I can't state that as part of what this is. No, just write it down. You know, just do away. The only person that you're disadvantaging by locking those things off and not talking about them is you. So don't do that. You know, address them. The only, you know, put them in a place that only you can see. Deal with it in a place that only you know how you've dealt with it. That's fine if you're worried about other people interacting with it, but you need to deal with it for yourself, because otherwise every other issue that you're going to bounce off of that in any way attaches to that, you know, that's just going to cause you more problems again and again and again until you eventually address it itself. But anyway, guys, I hope this is helpful, because this is something that I've tackled from a few angles now in regards to people not knowing how to ask questions, people not being taught how to ask questions, people not asking questions in a way that allow people to answer. You know, this is stuff that I talked about a little bit in my my Jordan Peterson video from earlier in the week. But this is something that I just wanted to throw out there, because I've had, as said, a couple of people, you know, both clients and others, coming to me and asking me about this the last whilst I've been away, sorting out my PC. So it's something that I wanted to address, because it can make a huge impact. You know, I've had people who have adopted some of these practices who have seen significant changes. One in particular that will always stand out to me was when I actually suggested them asking questions in this manner. Their perspective changed. They got a promotion. They got a job outside of completing university that they wanted. You know, it's stuff that's simple. It seems easy. It seems like it should almost be somewhat intuitive, and yet it's not something that we get to practice. It's not something that we get taught or reminded of. And as a result, you know, it just slips away, and then we don't see the benefit of it. So either way, guys, I hope you find this useful, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.